Welcome to Leadership Bites with myself, your host, Guy Bloom. This is a leadership podcast where I have conversations with colleagues, I chat with guests, and sometimes there'll be just me talking. You can connect with me at livingbrave.com, and when you enjoy the episode, subscribe and please tell everyone. So, Simon, great to have you on this episode of Leadership Bites. Welcome.
Thanks, Guy. It's nice to be on your show.
I know. Well, we had a little dalliance of trying to make it work the first time, and the computer said the proverbial no. So this is our second attempt. So well done us. Now, I know who you are because I've invited you on, and I always just want to make sure that people have clarity. So, if you were at a party and somebody said, what do you do? Then, Simon, what do you do? Introduce yourself.
Okay. Well, I'm a photographer, and I am currently working with the Daily Telegraph and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation on a project called Global Health Security, which has been running for about 4 years, whereby we travel out into the world looking for stories that are usually unreported or underreported, stories of situations and crises that are occurring out in the world, but that affect us all back where we live, even though we might think they don't.
So we'll get into that, because I came across you, as I do with a lot of people, through LinkedIn, and I saw some of the things that you were posting and people have been referencing. And I think it helps a lot to understand what somebody's talking about when you understand the journey that got them to where they are. Mm-hmm. I think it adds weight and a kind of sense of depth to the human being. So, Simon, give me a sense of, because, everybody's got a camera on their phone, right, these days. And back in the day, you probably had to know how to take a good photo. Yeah. And, in the sense of, getting the focus right and all that kind of stuff. Sure. So you started, and this is no judgment on age, but you started a little bit before that, as I did. So how did you, in a kind of, in a sensible sort of way, how did you get here?
Well, that's a long journey.
Okay.
I have to compress that somewhat. I started in New Zealand in the mid-'80s, and I discovered photography, and I thought, this is the career for me. Having shot some pictures while I was on the dole, in fact. I spent all my time as an unemployed youth in the library reading photography books, and I finally got accepted to one of the only photography courses that was available in the country, which I proceeded to fail, and then simultaneously got a job as a photographer on a national newspaper for a couple of years, where I covered my first foreign assignment, which was the military coup in Fiji. And I thought, well, this is pretty good. So I want to do this. So I traveled out to Fleet Street in 1987 and worked there, and on and off have worked in Fleet Street ever since, although have done a number of other things as well in parallel.
Is a normal first assignment a military coup in Fiji?
First foreign assignment. Well, I was misled.
It sounds like you do a couple of weddings first, at least.
Yeah. Well, I'd done a lot of domestic news, but it was my first foreign assignment, and I was misled into thinking that foreign assignments involved, sun-kissed beaches and wonderful tropical cocktails, and then you find yourself in the Balkans in the middle of winter, and it's not like that at all.
And let's just pick up on that one, because I imagine an experience like that could either make you go, well, I don't mind going abroad, but do you know what? I don't want to be doing this kind of thing. So what got you? What hooked you into that?
Well, there are so many different aspects of it that are compelling. Traveling gives you the opportunity to record things that you wouldn't even get to experience, in your kind of a life of work and holidays. So to be completely immersed in the story is, it's such a wonderful privilege. And, living photography the way that I do, you want to put yourself, front and center of all of those experiences, so that you can record the absolute extremes of human emotion, and you're only going to see that if you're moving around.
No, I understand that, but when one experiences something like war and conflict, that's a very particular experience, I can imagine, as opposed to covering a presidential cavalcade or it's a different kind of thing. So what is it that keeps you or has enabled you to operate in that space, and I don't know if the word is enjoy it or continue in it or
be satisfied by it,
be
fulfilled by it.
Fulfilled by it. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I discovered pretty early on in life that I have mechanisms and techniques for separating experiences that I'm witnessing from affecting me. And in fact, I just this morning had a cup of coffee with someone I haven't seen for a while, who said, "You've just come back from Ukraine. How are you? Are you sleeping at night?" And I have to say, I'm a very disappointing photojournalist. I don't suffer flashbacks and PTSD. I have developed techniques that, at least when I'm in the moment, when I'm in a hospital or in a morgue or in a situation where someone's been terribly hurt, I can use all my energies and my skills to record their story and to show you what they're experiencing without me experiencing it. And that's quite hard to describe to you, but it's almost, it's like having a series of filters that you acknowledge. You have all this inside you, and you can deploy these things. And so you go into a terrible situation and you think, okay, so what is the picture here? What is going to show you, the viewer, this situation? How do I distill this down? How do I find, the light for this? What are the technical parameters that I'm working in? What are the physical security parameters? And so I'm dealing with all of these emotional things I'm witnessing, but with the other side of my brain. And that protects me in the moment. If I think about it later on, then that's hard. But when I'm there, it's okay.
And listen, I want to be very careful about sort of translating what I'm hearing into guy speak. But did I just hear you have a methodology of almost being connected to the requirements of the moment?
Yep. That's professionalism, isn't it?
Yes, yes, yeah. I almost wanted to not always use the word professionalism, because it sounds a little bit more than that, but maybe that's what it is. It's stepping outside of the moment, but maybe stepping into it through the fact that, no, what I'm going to do is, maybe it's like a fireman or somebody with the emergency services. Actually, what I'm going to focus on here is doing my flipping job, and that's what keeps me going. Yeah,
process and procedure. Completely. You couldn't, you can't do it for very long if you don't have those things to fall back on. And that is the same for anybody in any other role, in the military, in any of the emergency services, in the police, anybody who has to deal with the situation. Really, if you want any longevity in this career, then you've got to have processes that you follow and procedures that you follow. Yeah. Otherwise, you'd just be immersed. You couldn't function, and then there's no point being there.
I'm also very alert to you're in a scenario where people are raw, for the want of a better phrase. They've experienced loss at all levels. And what do you find is, when you're there with what could be quite a invasive intent, not that I know you have that, but an invasive instrument, a photograph. I know if I was crying, I might not want somebody to take a photograph of me, for example.
Or you might.
Yes, exactly. And that's the bit that, is it a judgment on who is willing? Is it them realizing the reality of why you're there? What gives you that entry point, I guess, into a moment of intimacy?
And when you begin doing this, it's difficult. And the more you do it, the more you realize that frequently people have bigger things on their mind than being photographed in the first instance. A lot of times people are initially hostile, and you have to push through that a little bit to the point where they realize you're not actually hostile yourself, and that your sole purpose is to record whatever tragedy has occurred, and you ultimately you only have to look back a few hours, days, weeks, certainly years, to see the benefit of having recorded the things that we have recorded over the last since the beginning of photojournalism, to see the value of it. And I think people ultimately realize that, and they might not necessarily realize it in the moment. But I would also say that to presuppose that me going and talking to people and photographing people in a moment of absolute despair is in some way wrong is taking away the right of those people to have their story told. And so when I meet a mother who's just found the body of her son in a morgue, she quite quickly takes the opportunity to tell me about her son and to show me photographs of him as a little boy when he was alive. So those are not the actions of people who feel that you're being intrusive. It might feel intrusive, and it's hard to do because that is not what we do as Westerners anyway, generally. That's not the way that we behave. So, I'm not there for me. I'm there to tell the story on somebody else's behalf, really. That's the professional part of it. Obviously, I'm there.
So am I hearing that correctly, that people may, in that moment, see you as a conduit to capturing their truth?
Yeah, completely. I don't think they consciously see that. But if they thought about it for a moment, it's fairly obvious, when you say what happened and they want to tell you all about their child or their loved one, then that's exactly what they're doing. They want that, And I've been to so many situations where I've been in events and I've spoken to people and said, look, if you want to talk, then that's great. I'm not in the business of and this is the other thing. So anybody who watches a lot of TV or movies sees journalists and photographers in particular portrayed in a very specifically aggressive way, very self-serving, very aggressive, only interested in one thing. So that's television. That's fiction.
Right.
And that's... Oh, I'm so sorry. I don't know if you can hear that. I thought I'd muted everything. I apologize.
It's
yeah.
So, so there's something. Yes. There's something here. I think I'm kind of interested in, which is do you have to monitor, I guess, yourself? I'll let you just get that.
On it.
Don't worry.
Yep, it's done. That's it.
Normally I get an Amazon person knocking, so
delivery.
Yeah, normally that happens. Well, I've got a bit of feedback now.
Oh,
for some reason, there's something happening at your end that's different.
No.
Okay.
Do you want me to hang up and come again or something?
No, hold on. Let's see what I can do there. Okay, I'll just I'll handle that at my end when I edit it. Okay. So I suppose it's managing timelines, and if you have a target on getting something done, I just wonder, do you have a sense of just how you stay alert to the danger of a situation, the needs of the person, the requirements you have for getting something done because of maybe sunlight and daylight, and how do you? Is that a conscious thing, or is that an element of, God, I've just been doing this for so long now, I just kind of I'm just present, and I just make the judgment calls as they happen. How do you sort of traverse that? Because in a wedding, I know I've sat there and they've got, hurry up, the light's going, and I go, well, that's fine. Nobody's shooting at us. So
yeah.
I just wonder how you do that.
Yeah, and it's nice to have some constraints, I think, to push against, and that just makes you work a bit harder. So if the light's going, then you do push harder, and you say, I got to stay here a bit longer. People are saying we can't stay here any longer. I think, well, I didn't come all this way not to get the photo. Or if the light's going, you might need to interrupt the interview that's taking place to shoot, but at the same time, some things just happen as a matter of second nature. So, like that really.
So when you get into these places, Simon, are you... What are the protocols? Do you have security? Are you jacketed up? Are you helmeted? What does Simon look like? What's because the photograph's there, but what's going on around you, I guess, to make sure that while you're focusing, you can't be alert maybe to other things that are going on. So what does that look like? Well,
I hate wearing all that stuff, body armor. And particularly don't want to be wearing it when the people around you aren't wearing it. That seems really peculiar. If you're, in a situation in a refugee camp or something where nobody else is protected except you, it's not a really good look. So you have to make quite a good call on that. In terms of, and just, you do develop a bit of a sixth sense, and you become fairly aware of the situation around you. We do have some security consultants that don't travel with us, but we phone and speak to them if we're moving from one part of the country to another. We don't speak to them on a daily kind of basis. And then, of course, we're speaking to other journalists who are coming in and out of the same areas as we have. And that really does help create some kind of level of to safety, making those assessments, working with people that you know and trust.
So I imagine it's quite a tight network of not even camaraderie, but listen, we're all in this together. So just let's make sure that we're spreading the news around about what we're seeing and experiencing and sensing, I guess.
Yeah, very much. Nobody would willingly send somebody or allow someone to go somewhere dangerous or because you to be careless. I mean, you would offer advice. I mean, whether people take it or not, everybody has a different risk threshold.
Well, I was just going to ask you that. Yeah, what is one person's not a problem and another person's no way, Jose? And I just wondered, when it comes to what you guys do, are there levels or tiers, like people that climb these mountains and some use ropes and some of them free climb?
Yeah.
Is there a tiering of photographer where he's a tier 1 danger person?
Yeah.
Talk to me about that.
I think there are some people who do this job because they want to experience the most intense situations that they can, and then there are other people who do the job because they want to record the most intense things that they can, and that's a big difference. You don't have to photograph guns to cover a war. You don't have to be shot at to cover the story in Ukraine. That's not necessary. I mean, as far as I know, nobody shot at me this time. So, I spent a lot of time in Bosnia and a lot of people shot at me. I'm not sure those images were any stronger for it. It's a byproduct of getting into places where you're recording what's going on, that you might get shelled or shot at or have some airstrike waiting to happen. But that shouldn't, for me, that's not the reason for doing it. I'm not going there looking forward to getting shot at. I'm not going there looking forward to coming face to face with a global superpower. Not at all.
That's interesting in some respects, that I guess you being shot at might increase a person's kudos maybe to the general public, but in terms of the narrative, if somebody's at loss or you're seeing somebody that's in a great amount of pain, the fact of what's just happened to you to get there, now I think about it, doesn't really add value to the story itself, is I think what I'm hearing from you there.
Yeah, I don't think it does. And, people make assumptions, but they really don't know what's going on behind the image and what risks the photographer is necessarily taking in order to capture what they are, I mean, you can take big risks covering things all over the world. Don't necessarily have to be in a war.
So when it comes to something like Bosnia and the Ukraine's very, very new right now, do you have any sense of people's relationships to imagery, maybe, and the narrative that goes with conflict, and if that's becoming more acute because we now have social media, so actually people are a lot more sensitive to it, or are they becoming desensitized to it because they're seeing it, along with funny puppy dogs on pianos, and then, in the same stream, there's something else going on. I wonder if you have a sense of a barometer, or anything like that might be sort of relevant just to understand.
Yeah, so like a powerful picture is a hard thing to make, and just because everyone can record things on their phone, and they generally record video, that doesn't create a powerful image. It doesn't necessarily distill the event in the way that presents the information in the strongest possible terms. So, I could wave a camera around a mass grave and that might give you an idea of the goriness of it and the number of bodies, but I don't know if it'll give you any real insight into what that means. And not everybody's going to respond in the same way to the same image anyway. I've been surprised at how many people have written to me who've responded to the stuff that we've published, and it's really affected them, really affected them. So I just, how people see my stuff, that's not something I have any control over. How they react to other material, I can only tell you how I react to it. And a lot of the time I'm, slightly wanting to understand more than I'm getting from what I'm seeing in social media. I mean, social media is not media, right? It's just entertainment. It's not the way that we should get our news and our information. Not like that. You need verifiable sources of information. Otherwise, it's meaningless. Absolutely meaningless.
And I seem to remember, I'm 52, so I seem to remember believing that when I heard a news outlet say something, it was probably true, give or take. Now I feel that news outlets have bias, dependent on who owns them and where they're coming from. So do you ever worry, fear, experience, or it's not really within my scope of control, so I just let it go, that an image that you've taken can be distorted?
Well, it could be.
By a narrative.
Yeah, and it can be, but generally it isn't. And certainly the news outlet I work for at the moment, The Telegraph, that's not happening. You might not agree with the angle that we take on it. I'm sure numerous Russians wouldn't agree with the angle and the approach that The Telegraph's taken, which is very clearly pro-Ukraine and anti-Russia. But the reality of the things I'm shooting and the stories that we're running that go with those, I'm entirely comfortable with that. And I think you can't, it's like the difference between me shooting a portrait of you and you showing me your passport photograph. So they're both photographs of you, but that one of them is perhaps going to give someone some insight into you, and the other one is just, this is how far apart your eyes are, So You've got to have an angle. You've got to have something to say. Otherwise, there's no point being there.
So that's interesting. A photograph is, in essence, that's an interesting thing, isn't it? If I stand still against a wall for my passport photo, or a portrait is taken, yeah, technically still me, but very, very different.
Mm-hmm.
So how much of this is, I was going to use the word art, but that isn't quite right. Maybe I think what I'm asking is, how do you get $64,000 question? How do you get the story into a picture?
Well, when I figure that out, I can stop working. Sometimes you get close to it and you find that all the elements come together to create something slightly bigger than, than the sum of the parts. So I think you need to be kind of cognizant and aware of everything at the same time that you can rely on your own innate, whatever gifts you have for being a photographer, and balance that with any, what you've learned over time. Your subconscious will help guide you as well. So there are different components that will help you create and make that image, which is why I'd much prefer to say you're making a photograph rather than taking a photograph, because you really, in order to be really effective, I think you need to be able to bring all those elements together, whether it's colors or patterns or composition or which lens you're choosing or how far you're standing, or apart from the moment when you actually drop the shutter. All of those things come together to say, right, that's what I'm seeing here.
So taking a photograph then is, just almost pressing the shutter regardless, or pressing the button regardless of not what's going on, but you're really only focused on trying to capture maybe an image to remind yourself of something or whatever that might be. But you're talking about composition. You're talking about paying attention to the human being in front of you, or the moment in time, not to create something that's artificial, but to actually try your best to actually capture, I guess, what you're experiencing and why you're reacting to it. I guess that's potentially what I'm hearing there.
This idea of a photograph being some kind of eternal, unimpeachable truth because it's a mechanical process, that doesn't hold water at all. And there's nothing about the photograph that's inherently truthful and accurate. So when I show you one of my photographs from anywhere, that is likely to be something that I've put together in a moment that represents everything, a great deal of what I was seeing and experiencing and thinking about at the time. And that is the truth of the situation as I'm reporting it to you. Now, if you tell me that anybody can do that, you just push the button, point the camera and push the button, there's no more truth in that than there is in me, waiting for the right light, getting down low, or standing up high to make something look more or less significant. Those interpretations are just things that I've brought to it because that's what I do. So, but the idea that in itself a photograph is somehow just like unimpeachable truth, that doesn't stack up, does it? Because it's a two-dimensional moment in time and a 500th of a second. Well, we don't see things in 500th of a second. We don't see things in 2 dimensions. And the color gamut and that we record on film and the way that things are recorded on digital media is limited, right? So it's just nothing about it in its essence is true until I bring to it what I consider to be a true evaluation, and you may or may not agree with it.
So there is something then maybe about I don't want to ordain photography with something that doesn't exist, because I don't do it for a profession. But I think I notice it in podcast, for example. There's something about people who are trying to promote themselves versus people that want to chat with the guest. It's just a podcast. The audio is being recorded, and video is being recorded. But somehow, when I experience it, I experience something different. Yeah. And the questions might even be the same. But for some reason, I connect more to the person that's clearly just having a chat versus the person that's interviewing the other person. And it's weird because technically they're virtually identical. But there is an element of maybe the catalyst for it, not the integrity behind it, maybe the reasoning behind it, the intent, that seems to somehow make it different. And maybe that's true in a photograph. Yeah, it's technically the same. It's light captured on paper or whatever, it is. But the truth of the matter is, maybe that's when a photograph speaks, or maybe that's when a song speaks. It's because the audience or the observer senses, for whatever reason, that this 2D thing, there was a human being that instigated it, captured it, and maybe there's an element of of them within it, even though it's not a photograph about them. So that sounds a little bit esoteric, but I just have a sense that might be true.
Yeah, I mean, we're complicated beings, right? Human beings are complicated. We have this inner child that's responding to different information from the adult, and, layers and layers of cultural and social influences that have made us brought us to where we are today. And which is one of the reasons I think photographers, need to kind of work to the market, to the people that they work to. It's about understanding your audience and understanding what resonates with your audience and what speaks to them, and the mechanisms that are meaningful, that you can employ to pass on that information. So, I mean, in a way, you can kind of deconstruct pictures into a component part. If I want to photograph someone and reinforce their vulnerability, if I look down on them, they look smaller and more vulnerable. If I look up at you, you look more powerful and dominant. I mean, that's a very simple technique that can frequently work to portray significance. So, and one of like a million that you might use at any one moment. That might not work for another audience. It does work for the audience that I take photographs to show to.
So there is something, if I have a politician that I want to denigrate, so I take a picture on purpose to try and make them look small, there's a lack of, I'm not going to get into it, but to me there'll be a lack of integrity there, that you've done that to manipulate somebody who might be strong, but to try and make them look weak.
Well, that would be a lack of integrity. If they're strong and you want to make them look weak, then that's a lie. But if they're weak and you want to make them look weak and reinforce that, then that is the truth. And so that is the big difference of it.
Yes, and am I trying to make them look weaker and even more vulnerable, or am I actually, what I'm trying to do is to replicate my emotional reaction to what I'm sensing in front of me, and to try and capture that in a manner that somebody eating their breakfast, in Sutton Coldfield in Birmingham will have a sense of the experience I'm having. So actually, if I over manipulate here, it may look staged. It may look, I found a doll on the floor. Could you hold this? It'll make it look more. That little bit of contrivance may absolutely ruin a shot.
Might do. Might make the shot.
Might make the shot, right? But if I'm saying pick that up and hold that, is it because what I recognize is that will give people the reaction that I'm having now? So there'll be a line, wouldn't there? There'll be a balance, and maybe that's what experience is, and maybe that's what judgment is, and maybe that's what I imagine. There are people that go too far, get it wrong, and maybe you more than I, but you could pick it up in their photography, where you'd have a sense of, Yeah, I can see what you've tried to do there, but maybe you've gone a bit too the wrong way.
Yeah, there's not a lot of that going on in newspapers and magazines now. You'll come across that all the time on social media, that kind of overt lying and manipulation and just inaccuracy. But you'll see, you're not going to see a very flattering photograph of Boris Johnson in the Guardian newspaper, because their whole political approach is that Conservative government is a failure. So it's unlikely they're going to show a flattering image of the guy. They might. But that's a long way from deliberately distorting the reality, our reality of the situation, to the point where it bears no resemblance to anything that was occurring.
Do photographers adjust their style according to the newspaper or the medium that they're being asked to create for, or is it generally no, they have a style and that connects them to the right one? What generally tends to happen? I'm sure there'll be outliers, but generally speaking, how does it work?
Yeah, I think the photographer's got a style and a way of working that they can apply on behalf of any client. Whether the client chooses to publish the pictures or not, it's difficult to know. I mean, if you're working for the newspapers that I work for, there are some stories that they're less likely to be interested in comparison with other stories. So you're less likely to shoot those, because I don't just turn up having been asked to go and photograph something. I go and find the stories that I want to photograph. Yeah, I just do. So it depends on how you work with the newspaper. If they've asked you to go and photograph a press conference that Boris Johnson's giving, then the Guardian is going to be more interested in a photograph that makes him look vulnerable and exposed, perhaps, in a given situation. But that's not necessarily the case. So, I think photographers generally have a style. They shoot a range of different images from an event, and then the publisher will choose which one reflects their editorial perspective. That's how that works.
So are the people when you go to these places like Bosnia and Ukraine, are the photographers out there who are completely freelance, who are literally just, they've self-funded to go out there, they're taking photos, they put it out into the world, and almost, they're literally just trying to sell their wares? And then there are photographers who are staffers, who are literally that they are working for a dedicated outlet. Is that the two things that are going on there?
Yeah, no staff photographers anywhere anymore, pretty much. It hasn't been the case for a long time. People on contracts and working with organisations directly.
Oh, so we want to get you for a month to go and do that, or whatever it is.
Well, I mean, they generally have a relationship with a newspaper, but they are not on the staff, so they might have had a contract with them for 20 years.
Okay.
It's a slightly nuanced point.
Okay.
I didn't meet so many self-funded people in Ukraine. Certainly, there isn't that much going on for freelancers. It's increasingly difficult to do that because it's very expensive to cover a war. You need a vehicle and fuel. That's expensive on a daily basis. And then you've got to have a fixer translator, also expensive. And then you've got to stay somewhere and eat. So those 5 elements can set you back $600-700 a day. So in order to break even, you have to sell, that much, and you got to get fly in and out. So it's a hell of a lot of money for a freelance to cover something in that way effectively. And you can cut a lot of corners, and I'm sure there are a lot of people doing that, trying to make their name. But mostly people are on assignment. The people that I came across were on assignment.
Do you how do you decompress, Simon? Or is that, your particular makeup doesn't need it? Or do you have when you come back from somewhere like that and you've seen and experienced certain things, Yeah, what's your process to suddenly be walking down the main street with McDonald's on your left and people on your right, and I imagine it's quite a shift.
I tend to do that quite quickly. I do leave stuff behind. I'm a very disappointing photojournalist. I don't have PTSD. I don't have flashbacks. I don't wake up in the night in a cold sweat. I just don't. So whatever my processes are when I'm in the field, they tend to protect me quite well. When I come back, I spend time with my kids, and I'm very focused on them, and I'm planning the next trip. The only time it's very difficult is when I have to talk in depth about what I've experienced or write about it. Then I find it hard. Then it's all coming back in a different way. That's hard. But otherwise, it's okay. I hang around with other photographers and journalists that I work with out, and when we get back together, we might, catch up and talk about a few things. But mostly, you've been leaving it behind quite well.
So there is a compartmentalism of I'm going to work.
Yeah, definitely.
And literally putting it into that box. And so when you write it, when you have to write about it, is that because you're having to go? If you wrote about it when you were over there doing the photography,
well, I did
right.
Actually a couple of times, right. And that was tough. Yeah.
So why was that tougher? Do you have any sense of why?
I can only imagine it's because you have to use a different part of your brain when you're describing it, and I don't have any mechanisms to keep those things apart. When I'm in the field and working, I'm thinking about all of the technical aspects of the work in association with understanding and feeling, albeit slightly separated, feeling the things that I have to feel in order to make the images. So when I'm not doing that, when I don't have the camera, when I'm just thinking about it and telling you how it felt, then I'm really just digging straight into the vein of how it felt. That's all. And then that's really hard.
Yeah, because very often when you're working with people and coaching them, part of people accessing their emotions is to say, write things down. When you physically write it down, I think you're right. There's a connection there, and so for some it can be very cathartic. If they've held it, it's causing them some issues. To say, well, actually, by writing it down and literally closing the book on it, you can bring it out of yourself. But the chances are you will have to relive the experience to get it out.
Oh yeah.
So I guess there is something there about, well, if it's not causing me any harm, why do I need to do that? Versus that methodology. So it's just interesting that you have that experience. So just being alert to time. How one of the big questions for me is this something that a lot of people like the idea of potentially being? I'd love to be a photographer. That sounds. I'm into photography. So is it a glamorous kind of? Because I always find that most roles look absolutely awesome until you start doing them.
Yeah, it can be glamorous until you spend 8 hours on the floor in Addis Airport waiting for the next connecting flight. In fact, I'm going to Zambia in about 4 hours' time, and I'll be back for 4 days, and then I'm going to Afghanistan for 2 weeks. So is that glamorous? Yeah, kind of, but it's also very disruptive, makes it difficult to live a kind of, regularized life where you can arrange to play sport with people or go to even joining a gym seems pointless because I'm never around. But the lifestyle's it can be extremely lonely if you're on your own in a Sudan hotel room for 5 days watching the proverbial slow turning fan and just thinking, get me out of here, then that's a hard place to be. But then other times you just feel like you're the most fortunate person in the world and I wouldn't be doing anything else.
So listen, on that note, Simon, I'm just aware that we've been sort of chatting for 45 minutes now, so it's time goes very quickly when we do this stuff. So, I was just fascinated to reach out, and I think one of the things I'm picking up on with you is I say this as a point of praise, not a judgment, which is, and of course I don't know you, so this may be, or anybody that knows you may be going, "Oh, you're clueless. If you'd only have to be around him for a day to realise how ridiculous what you're about to say is." But there's an element of normality to you, and that doesn't probably mean that you're normal. But what it means is there's an element to doing something which isn't, per se in the normal spectrum of what somebody might be doing, but it feels as if, having spoken to you and searching potentially for things that don't exist with you, that is actually the professionalism, the craft, the ability to be relatively surgical in terms of what I'm doing, is to look at it through a lens of normality, to let me do something that I'm not in a SWAT team, I'm not in a special forces unit, but it's definitely, I'm definitely not stacking the shelves at Tesco's. So there's something there that is, for some people, would be considered on being on the edge a little bit, but you bring a kind of, dare I say, a mundaneness to it. And I mean that very carefully, as in, because I pack my bags, I get on the plane, I go there, I know my craft, I take some bloody good photos, and then I come back, which I know is a lot more. There's a lot more going on, but there is and I've noticed that with certain military types where they say, well, we just do the basics very, very well. Yeah, and I kind of pick up on that with you, I think.
There's a great, there's a huge, I get a huge amount of satisfaction in being able to do something that I know other people can't do. And you might, I remember talking to a guy who was a tremendous mentor of mine, a guy called Tom Stoddart, and he died just a few months ago. He said to me, listen, don't ever imagine for a moment that anybody can do what we can do. And I thought, well, maybe you, buddy. But I've come to realize that, people can't do what we do. And, it takes a great deal of time to get to the point where not only can you be a good photographer, but you can function as a good photographer. And, I've discovered over the years that the more professional you are, the more you really care. So, the idea of appearing mundane, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, and I said that very carefully.
No, well, you can just look at the pictures. They're not mundane. They speak for themselves.
And that's what I mean. It's like when I speak to people, again, in the military, they're doing, they're taking over small countries with a spoon. Yeah. It's not, what they're doing is extreme, but they're very level. They're relatively mundane. They don't, they're not fulfilling the caricature of what you see in a Hollywood movie, and you go, I know what you do for a living, but it's only because I know what you do for a living that because it's not fulfilling any of my stereotypes. Fulfill a stereotype, for God's sake.
I know, it's disappointing.
But that's what you're thinking. I'm professionalism. The more you care, the more professional you are, and the more professional you are, then the more everyday it is, because that's just what I do. Yeah. And if I was an aspiring photographer looking at you, what would I be picking up on? I go, focus on the craft.
Yeah.
And the craft will take care of you. I think that's what I'm getting from this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
You're right to get that.
Well, that's a beautiful thing. So on that note, Simon, I'm going to put, in fact, if somebody wanted to kind of look you up, I'll put it in the description for the podcast, but for the episode, but if somebody wanted to sort of check you out.
SimonTownsley.com. I've got a website, and SimonTownsley.com, and then Simon Townsley on Instagram. There's regular material going up on there. So you can find it all.
Perfect. So what we'll do is I'll bring this to a close. If you just stay with me just to make sure everything's uploaded, and we'll chat afterwards. But Simon, from me and those that are listening, thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's it. So I hope you enjoyed the episode. Please share so others get to hear about us, and subscribe so you keep up to date on new episodes. Also visit livingbrave.com if you want to connect with me and find out more about executive coaching, team effectiveness, and changing culture. Oh, and of course you can buy my book Living Brave Leadership on Amazon. So on that note, see you soon.